Welcome everyone to Building a Beautiful Life, session number 7. We are really excited to be here today, especially to talk about a topic that I know is important to all of us, and I know it's excuse me, difficult for me, probably for most, to dance in relationship in our lives. And so we're really grateful to have the perspectives and wisdom of Jogen to guide us today and to explore relationships. I'll just introduce Jogen, read out a little bit of his bio, and then hand it over to him for the session. So, Adam Jogen Salzberg is a Zen Buddhist teacher with Dharma transmission in the Soto Zen lineage. Jogen has practiced meditation for 25 years, including 15 years of full-time practice and study at Great Vow Zen Monastery. To complement his practice and teaching, he is trained in voice dialogue, in process work, in Dzogchen, in the paratheater medium of Antero Ali. And aside from that, he is a friend of Dharma Gates. He led a retreat for us in January here in North Carolina, and he's a teacher I greatly look up to and respect. So thank you for being here with us, Jogen. We really appreciate it, and I'll hand it to you.
Thanks. Okay. So I was thinking that the real teachers for me about relationship, besides the Buddhist tradition, everything else I've practiced in, have just been the friendships that I've stuck around in over years. And the friendships as well as the romantic partnerships. And it's friendship is such a potent vessel for waking up in, but in some sense, it's really not celebrated traditionally. In the text, you will find almost nothing about the value of relationship besides a nod to friendship, a sense that it's good to be in Sangha together, and so forth, Brahma Vihara's teachings. But in a lot of ways, Buddhism was such a solo practice. Even when it was done together, it was like alone together. So this is territory that is, in some sense, it's fresh. There's a lot to learn here. And I come at this as an apprentice, a student of relationship. I think my current partner is my greatest teacher, right? So it's in this spirit that I share this with you. So this is not just about romantic relationships. What I'm going to say today could apply to friendships, could apply to colleagues at work, could apply to many different kinds of relationships you find yourself in. I think, however, it is commitment, whether that's explicit or not, between a group of people or between two people to work on what comes up that makes a lot of what I'm going to talk about possible. Is it possible for you to be really committed to someone as a friend and do deep work and them not be so committed? Yes, it is possible. It's harder, but it is possible. But nonetheless, it's fidelity to relationships that makes this kind of work possible. So the first thing this is going to be a mix of teaching and some guided practice. And then after I go through the main themes I wanted to explore, we'll open it up for discussion at the end. I want to begin by talking about the samsara of relationships. The samsara of relationships, basically, from a Buddhist point of view, if we are not liberated beings, we live with dualistic consciousness. And if you live with dualistic consciousness, there is no perfection to be found in the world. In other words, for dualistic consciousness, there is always a problem with someone or something or some configuration. There will never not be a problem. So a perfect relationship from a Dharma point of view is, in some sense, on one level, it's a fantasy. If we're talking about the configuration being perfect. So for example, we might be searching for the perfect friends or the perfect partner. But what we see when we really understand mind and Dharma is we could go from one person to another, but all we could ever do is get a different configuration of imperfection. You might think, oh, I'm going to stop dating so-and-so because I want to date someone who's more like Z instead of Y. And that's fine. It could be a very different configuration. You might temporarily prefer that configuration, but you can only go from one imperfect configuration to another. For the dualistic mind, for the part of us that's discriminating right and wrong, which is mostly what we engage the world with. So this invites practice, and this invites us to become more aware and more empowered in our stance towards relationship. Because what we might be seeking as an ideal, what we might be seeking as far as nourishment in a relationship is not dependent and maybe doesn't exist in the particular person. It has much to do with what we bring. There's no perfection for the dualistic mind, right? So the dualistic mind, let me unfold that a little bit. So this is in contrast to a mind that exists in seamlessness, a mind that is free from fixed identity. The dualistic mind lives in a strong sense that the other is other. I am here and you are there, and that is a primary reality, right? From that, we have the duality of right and wrong, especially when it comes to human beings related. Some of us are right and some of us are wrong. And normally we think we're right. So self and other, the duality of right and wrong, that's where all of our conflicts with people come into play, right? We're always taking positions with each other based on views that we have, based on opinions, based on convictions and beliefs. Duality of self and other, duality of right and wrong. We also have patterning. That is, as beings who live under the burden of strong identities, our behavior becomes very actually limited. That's one of the things I'm going to talk about today. We get into relationships and there is, in a way, a limited menu of how we can show up. And one evidence of this is how we repeat some of the same patterns with different iterations of similar people over and over and over. Sometimes we get really bored and we think the problem is the person, the group of people. But actually, from a Dharma point of view, maybe we could say it's our own patterning, it's our own stance in relationship, and how confined that is, that's boring. So duality means we're karmically patterned. We can't, without practice, we can't just show up however we want to in relationship. We might actually hear things like that. It's sort of like Instagram spirituality sort of things that are like, just show up like XYZ in your relationships, just be different. And then we try to, and we find, wait a second, I can't just be different. I don't know how to do that. I just am locked into my patterning. There's all these karmic mechanisms. So duality of self and other, duality of right and wrong, patterning. And then in accord with that, our body mind actually closes. We become, instead of open and permeable to one degree or another, we have layers of defensiveness and kind of inward consciousness is turned in on itself. Call that self-consciousness. And so the ability to appreciate the other, the ability to be free, the ability to feel the deep connection that we intuit becomes very limited. We get glimpses of it. Those glimpses propel us through life, maybe seeking for that to be more than a glimpse for a whole lifetime. If you think about romance, some wise people have said that the longing or the investment that used to be put into the divine or into higher purposes, we could say, I know that's a little loaded, has been displaced onto the romantic partner. There is some deep belief that's culturally sanctioned and reflected all the time that the summit of our existence is going to be found with the magical other who will free us from that very closure, free us from that duality that has us turned in on ourselves. And the problem is it's true temporarily. Like when you fall in love and there's this mix of spiritual and biochemical forces that free one from the fixed dualistic mind state, you actually taste that. But then it changes because it's coming from circumstance. But all of this is workable. One of the great messages of Buddhist practice is that we are formless beings that tend towards form. There is no finality on the level of heart or mind. The body has its karma. Now we can train the body and change the body. It has a thick karmic momentum. It's not so easy to change. But mind and heart are really a patterning of light, a patterning of energy, and they can be profoundly opened and changed and transformed. So the good news is that relationships are a very rich place of Dharma practice. All of the teachings and let's say the ideals of the contemplative life can be brought into our relationships. And part of my message is, why not? Right? Many of us, let's say we get serious or we get committed in practice, and then a particular separation arises, and that is there's what I do on the cushion and there's my time with other people. And my time with other people is often, many people report to me, they feel that they go unconscious in relationship. And they just feel animated by their patterning. And so it's a not viewed as practice, and more is put on formal practice because that's a place that one feels more free. And it becomes a kind of closed loop. But all of the qualities of Dharma can be brought into relationship: presence, surrender, generosity, non-separation, inconceivability, that is letting go of fixed ideas of the person before us and encountering the suchness, the beauty of not knowing in a stale way who someone is. Rooting in truth, staying in touch with principle as we engage with others who are different. And maybe for lay practitioners, this is even more of an imperative, because we do spend more time than, let's say, a monastic or a retreat yogi engaging with people. We don't want to have a dissonance of that social aspect of our life and being with people. So I have basically three themes that come underneath this umbrella that I want to bring in today. Because we're not, I don't know if we had enough time, maybe we could practice relating with each other in these ways, but my sense is all I can do is offer you a taste and some inspiration, and maybe a little bit of method of how you might begin to explore these things in your relationship. So a lot of this is theory. Yeah. Because where the rubber meets the road is the people that we encounter in our everyday lives that we spend time with. That's the laboratory to do the experiment. So the first thing I want to talk about is bonding patterns. This phrase comes from a tradition of parts work called voice dialogue. That's part of my background. Bonding patterns basically means that we fall into, you could even say, archetypal patterns of relating with each other, especially in partnerships of various kinds. So on one hand, relationships have the potential to be a dance of energy that's juicy and enriching and playful. On the other hand, they tend towards stale patterning actually pretty quickly. Pretty quickly after we meet somebody, it doesn't take long before a pattern begins to establish itself, a pattern for how we relate. So I want to say something, step back and make a broader statement about how I view relationships. First of all, friction in our relationships as Dharma people is good. Conflict is good, disagreement is good, argument is good. Because the friction in relationship is a kind of heat that if we respond to the heat that comes from, let's say, the daily irritations or the places of incompatibility or the disagreement of views, if we stay in that heat, then it has the potential to melt our fixedness. To be a person of Dharma practice is to incline towards deep flexibility. And the only way to become flexible is to melt our stubbornness. There's a saying that a person of Zen can turn on a dime. So friction, when we have conflict, disagreement, when we have, for example, the opposites attract kind of pattern, that is a heat that is good. We need this for relationship to wake us up. If a relationship has no friction, it tends towards being like a lullaby. It tends to put us to sleep, actually. So just right there, you could see that if you shift how you view what arises in your relationship, it already can be experienced differently. Some people think, oh, my relationship has a lot of conflict in it. We're probably not compatible. Right? It's a matter of degree. If you're not compatible enough, it could be ideal for growing up and waking up. It could be actually perfect. So friction is good. That's true with a boss. That's true with a teacher. If you have a spiritual teacher you have no friction with, that will probably put you to sleep. Frictionless is good. Frictionlessness is good. It's one of my favorite terms for the opposite of dukkha, the opposite of suffering, for a description for when we're free, when we're liberated from a Dharma point of view, frictionlessness. That's good because in our relationships, we need harmony, support, and resonance to some degree. We need these for relationship to be worthwhile. If there's no harmony, resonance, or support, then there won't be any trust. We won't be able to soften enough to get real with another person on whatever level. So that being said, back to the bonding patterns. Every relationship has a pattern of power and vulnerability going on in it. In some relationships, especially committed relationships, this takes the form of parent-child. Now you may think, I'm not a child in my relationships, or I'm not a parent, but if you pay attention, it will become apparent that these dynamics are there. Power and vulnerability, parent-child, they're kind of equivalent. Power being the parental side and vulnerability being the child side. I'm going to use these interchangeably. So these aren't bad, they aren't good, they're just nature, that this happens. That these dynamics come into play, not bad, not good. But part of Dharma practice is to bring some lucidity to observing patterns. So I want to invite you into some reflection about how this might show up for you. Think of whatever is the closest relationship that just comes to mind for you now. You can just trust whatever presents itself. And think of how there is power and vulnerability, or parent and child involved. So power is when somebody has more competency, more resources, more detachment, right, than the other person. No such thing as equality in a relationship. There's always a differential of power and vulnerability. Right? For example, if you were dating somebody and you were more attracted to them and you were more interested in the relationship than they are, they have power and you have more vulnerability. Or think of the ways that you are in parent for somebody and you are taking care of their vulnerability. Maybe there's a relationship where you are the person that's leaned into for support emotionally. Maybe you're someone in a friendship who is more stable with resources or has more emotional stability at the moment. You might be in the parent place. Think about how the different power that you have creates vulnerability in the other. Think about how your vulnerability allows there to be power in the other, or how your child allows there to be parent in the other. So what we want to do is bring consciousness to these kind of patterns. If there is no reciprocity, a relationship will be one-sided. It will settle into that pattern and it will be dissatisfying. An example of that could be something like, if in a relationship, now we're talking about karma here for those who want a Dharma translation. These are karmic patterns. Right? If in a relationship, your friend or partner or whoever it may be is always coming forward as the one who has the messed up life and you're holding space for them. You know, on one hand, there's generosity there. You get to step forward and be that for them. But if it's one-sided, then you don't have the opportunity to let your vulnerability come forward. It will lock you into a pattern. A mundane example of this for me is being in the kitchen with my girlfriend. So I used to be a cook at a monastery, and I once cooked for like 80 people for like a whole week, and I was very much in my competency. I was in power. But my girlfriend views me as a terrible cook, and she's much more confident. So what happens is we get into the kitchen, she slides into this parental power place, and I actually lose my competency if I'm not conscious. I become like a child. Right? And she's regarding me as someone who's a child in the kitchen. And all of a sudden, all of my skills go out the window. Right? That patterning is very dissatisfying. I leave those encounters, the preparing those meals, feeling very dissatisfied because that pattern just keeps playing out. I'm not able to be the whole of myself. The relationship has this karmic pattern. Now, if that was the pattern in the whole relationship, that would be a big problem. If always she was in competency and I was in the child, I didn't know how to do anything and she knew how to do everything. But thankfully, I recognize that where I have power, I need to step into those competencies, and she allows herself to be vulnerable. And then we have reciprocity, and it works. Once we see these patterns, and I'm just starting to describe it for you so you can start to notice it at play in your relationships, then we have the invitation to disrupt them, because they will not disrupt on their own. There are long-term relationships. You might know, for example, some people who've been in them, that they settled in early into patterns like this and they still enact them, and it's very dissatisfying 40 years later, especially marriages. And because of the stale patterning, people want to get out of the relationship. They actually check out of it at some level. They really disinvest from the friendship or the partnership. It won't stop on its own. That's actually a very interesting thing about karma that the Buddha was pointing out, is karma self-replicates. Patterning just continues. If we don't disrupt these kinds of patterns, even if we lose that friend or that partner, that relationship, probably it will find itself re-arising in just the next relationship. Our practice of awareness, broadly defined here as mind that is detached from patterning, allows us to disrupt patterning at some level. So an example of disruption, I want to give you some examples. One is, if you find that you are in a relationship, always the cool, calm, collected, equanimous one, then what's happening is your vulnerability and tenderness is not showing up there. It may not be even something the other person even knows about. If you notice that's a pattern, you risk rawness. I know I work with some people who have a belief that they shouldn't ever burden somebody with their emotional distress. My emotional challenges are mine alone. It's not someone else's problem. Disrupting that pattern will be risking rawness, risking revealing that to the person who often doesn't actually have the ability to be in the parent for you. They don't have the ability to show up compassionately for you. We have to make that, it's a kind of generosity to make that available. The converse could also be true. Let's say that you are in a relationship where you feel like a child because the person is always holding power or competency. You need to bring into that relationship someplace that you are competent, or bring into that relationship some element of taking control. You make that leap. You be forthright. Right? You enact your agency rather than, for me, it feels like I'm just like in the passenger seat. This passive passenger seat way of being in a relationship that's really unsatisfying. Disrupting patterning can be asking for help. It could be allowing confusion. It's basically seeing the opportunities to shake things up. Now, part of the reason we settle in bonding patterns, we could even say part of the reason that we're karmically patterned beings, that we tend to live within the same habit structures for years and years and years, is that to disrupt them is destabilizing. One of the untruths of secular mindfulness, or of how Buddha Dharma becomes secularized, is that it's a means to be put together well. But to do deep Dharma work is to come apart. It's to disrupt your sense of who you are. So in this context of relationship, part of the reason that we settle into patterns so quickly and so easily is that to change them invites instability. It disrupts a certain kind of safety. But stasis makes for stale relationship. So that's the force we're working against in shaking up patterns, is that we shake up a certain kind of stability. That's one of the questions of practice that we live with in general. Would I rather be comfortable or free? Would I rather have the familiar and the safe or free? So that's just a little dip into bonding patterns. There's a lot more that could be and should be said about it. Well, no, I feel like I want to open it up and see if there's any questions or reflections on that. Is any of this resonant? I'm not actually sure. Yeah. Actually, at a certain point, we have to disrupt this bonding pattern with our parents. We have to break out of the child and they have to let go of the parent, or else we have something that never matures past memories. There can be a lot of force to maintain that patterning. It's not that you don't do the dance of parent and child, but it gets reversed. You play both sides. Yeah. I was thinking of Sydney because I think Sydney's there with her mom right now.
My dad also came to join.
Oh, okay.
Everyone here, though, is saying that this is very resonant.
Okay, good. There are if we think in terms of parts, in bonding patterns, different parts of us they're what relate to each other. So for example, let's say you meet somebody and they're the one who really excites you, and you're the one who needs to be excited, right? There's these kind of patterning where someone's in a little bit of a stale or a dry place in relationship, and then the juicy person comes in. Well, eventually the person who is exciting, there's more to them than that. And then some other part of them comes forward. But if the relationship was glued together based on they're the exciting one and I'm the one who gets to be excited, then there begins to be this dissonance. We want to allow the other person to not be that way, allow them a broader range of who they are. But that's a place often that we can chafe against. We feel dissatisfied when someone else's wholeness is brought forward. We have to claim the part of us that can find juice in life rather than depending. So in a way, this is another way of talking about codependencies.
Can I ask a question?
Please, yes.
So you mentioned the parent-child bonding pattern. I assume there are other archetypal bonding patterns.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing like a list or just
Yeah.
any other of the big ones?
Well, in this theory, which is just that, it's a theory that to check out, power and vulnerability, or parent and child, is the primary archetype for all relational patterns. And then everything else is a different iteration of that. In other words, our psyche and our bodies are attuned to family ways of being, and those come into everything. So for example, teacher student is a parent child relationship. Yeah, at its best, it's wonderful. Had lots of problems though, right? You can see that in that pattern, if the teacher holds to being the teacher and can never be the student, stale, doesn't work. Yeah, eventually doesn't work. So yeah, I think most of them, you could see them as a dance of power and vulnerability, different iterations of that. Power is a reality that is just present in our interactions with each other. It's not something that we can just do away with or pretend doesn't exist. It's always there. Yeah, and there's different kinds of power. But if we're not conscious of it, if we hold power unconsciously, it causes suffering. In other words, if we're in the parent or we're in the whatever power position and we're not conscious of how that puts someone else in vulnerability, perforce almost, then that lack of consciousness is a cause of suffering. So I want to go on to my next theme, and they're all related. So I've been working with people in relationship for a good while now in different settings. And at one point it dawned on me that especially with long-term friends and couples, and maybe this is true for in families as well, that one of the most pernicious things that's always tending towards manifestation is that we go into the courtroom with each other and we're making a case of who's right and who's wrong. The longer we're in a relationship, the more we build a backlog of right and wrong. As long as we are in right and wrong, there is no love or real connection. Right? As long as we are in right or wrong, there is no love or real connection. So I call this the courtroom because I hear people who want to return to connection, but letting go of either being wrong or being right gets in the way. I think of Carl Jung. this brilliant quote. He said, "Where there is will to power, there is no love. Where there is love, there's no will to power." Power in this sense is the power of being right. So think of some long-term relationships. Maybe just trust whatever one comes up for you, especially if there is a recurring conflict. And think about how it's related or not to being right. See if you could connect to what position you're taking in contradistinction to the other person. It could be something as simple as there's a right way to do the dishes. It could be as thorny as politics. It could be whose fault it is that there's not more this or that in the relationship. And can you feel that part of you that takes the position of, I'm right? Now, if you can contact that sense of I'm right, and usually anybody that we have aversion towards in our lives, this is going on. There's this positioning of right and wrong. See if you can feel the suffering of being right, the dukkha of being right. If you could just shift into your I'm right about what you did or what you said. Feel what that's like in your being, to be in that stance. In this moment, feel the dukkha of being right. Feel the disconnection from the person of being right. You may be able to sense the wrongness of the other. Because if you're right, then they're wrong. There's no other way for it to be. See if you can feel the person as object that is wrong. Now, this can be true for political, socio-political things too, right? There might be a whole group of people that you're right about and they're wrong, or you're in the right about something and they're in the wrong. Feel what it's like to be right, what that is in your body and mind. This, in a sense, is one of the most important contemplations I believe that we can do in any relationship that we give a crap about. Is we have to see how we enter the courtroom and see that you can't get out of the courtroom on its own terms. Because what I'm saying is not for you to say, oh, actually, let me let go of being right. I'm wrong. There's no love in being wrong either. Now, I'm not talking about appropriately owning up for actions and that kind of ethical work. That's a little bit different. I'm talking about what happens when we're just in this whole mind state. There is no love in the courtroom. A place to catch this really in action is the next time you're with, let's say, a loved one, and you do disagree. Feel what happens if you start to slide into the position of being right, and feel what happens in your heart and to the sense of energy between the two of you. Really got to catch it in action. one of the Buddha's teachings that was actually super radical, and I call it super radical because it was so explicitly stated. You don't find it so explicit in other traditions, is that in order to be free, we have to let go of views. There's actually one sutta where the Buddha is saying, ordinary people are attached to their things and their family and so forth, but practitioners are attached to their views, which is really true. Just pop on YouTube or something, or just hang out with a group of Dharma teachers. In other words, from a Buddhist perspective, love is there when we're not holding to a fixed view. That's in the Metta Sutta, right? Not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one. Pure meaning that space of warmth and connection is not severed by a view of the other as being wrong because I'm right, or vice versa. Sometimes there's a sense of being misseen. Yeah. I can only see 4 people, but if you could raise your hand, if you ever have the sense that someone doesn't see you correctly. Yeah. Now, especially if we are the child or the vulnerability in a power or parent relationship, we often feel like we're not really seen by the power or the parent side. There's really interesting research that says, this was corporate research, that the more power you have, the less empathy you have for those in positions under you. And what they did is they saw that the more people gained power in organizations, the less they understood the challenges of those who had less power. So this is actually one of the problems with power being unconscious is empathy gets diminished gradually and imperceptibly. So we could say, maybe it's true that we are actually misseen. But as practitioners, we really are trying to live as honestly and lucidly as we can. And so we have to ask, where does the accurate perception lie? So let's say there are half a dozen people listening to this talk right now, and there are different opinions about its quality. Who's right? I could say the person who didn't like it, or if I didn't like how they heard me, I could say, well, they're not seeing me. But how do I know where true perception lies? How do we know we're not being seen? What does that mean? Is there actually a you independent of a viewer? Now consider that for a moment. So let's say you're in a room with all these different people. You have friend 1, friend 2, you have your mother, you have your boss, you have your partner. They all are looking at you and seeing you differently. Who has the real version of you? Who is actually seeing you accurately? What would make it accurate? From the perspective of wanting to be right, which is this deep clinging in human beings, the perception that agrees with us is the one that we think is right. It's good to admit that. The person who sees us is the person who shares the view of us that we agree with. Now, it is true that you may meet somebody who is free enough of judgment and whole enough in themselves that they see more of you than other people seem to. That's a very healing thing. And in a way, a different thing. But we feel like we're misseen, but where's the accurate view of who I am? Who holds it? How do you see you? How do you know you see you accurately? For example, your inner critic has a very different view of who you are than other parts of you. The critic thinks it's right, doesn't it? So this kind of contemplation, we're contemplating how there's nothing apart from perspective, is a contemplation of emptiness. It's an entry into emptiness. It's what interdependence really means. In any situation where we are stuck in right and wrong, I have the correct view of what's going on, you have the wrong view. What is the basis for that correct view? From where are we looking? Now, it's one thing to reject, and this is tricky how to language it, to reject being someone who lives in the courtroom in our relationships. But it's another thing altogether to not fall into right and wrong. In a way, our ordinary mind simply cannot do that. Our ordinary mind is intractably, ineluctably, indubitably dualistic. We have a perception of something, we encounter an experience, and automatically, at light speed, the mind categorizes it as better or worse, good or bad, I like it, I don't like it. Everything is ranked imperceptibly. Each experience is compared to a previous experience. That's discriminating mind. Yeah. Apparently there's an area of the brain that they know it does that because it goes offline on certain states of meditation and psychedelics, the parietal frontal cortex. So our ordinary mind cannot and is not free from right and wrong. We have to access something else. That's one of the gifts of meditation. So I want to just invite you into a little bit of meditation. And I want to use space. So if you can, turn in a direction where you just have some space in front of you. And let your eyes remain open. And the quality of attention, let it begin to rest in this space. Let attention blend with this space that's right before you. And let the discriminating, the thinking mind just arise. But imagine that it's arising not inside of your skull, but it's just arising in this space. You could imagine that thoughts are like little fishes swimming through this space. And notice that thoughts depend on mind, but mind does not depend on thought. Notice that in the gaps between discursive thoughts. So still sustain the basic space. Your attention and this space just blended, resting in each other. And distinguish clearly the space of mind from thoughts that arise in it. See that the space and the presence of mind does not depend on thoughts, discriminations, labels. But that thoughts and discriminations, images, whatever is arising, depends on this space. And transfer this space-like mind to just some phenomena in the room you're in. And just behold it from this place of just sheer openness. And try to stay in that place before any discrimination, labeling, or judgment comes in. Just be with the isness of the object from this basic space. Forget the name of it. Forget even the sense of what it is. And just behold it in this simplicity. Beholding the isness of this, whatever it may be. Now, finally, infuse this space and this beholding of the object with heart, with warmth, with metta. See it with the eye of the heart. And distinguish, this is a very different mode of experience from perception through labeling and judging and thinking about the thing before you. Beholding with the space of heart. And what does it feel like to be in this mode? Just marinate in that for a little bit. So now, disconnect from the heart and look at the same thing and bring your discriminating mind back in. Think about how you could improve on it, how you may have seen a better version, or you could even have positive thoughts about it, but experience now the same phenomena, but bring in your thinking mind and notice what that's like. How does the perception change? Let all of the associations that mind has with this thing come forward. And what happens to perception? This basic alternation is, I think, core to a life of Dharma. We dip into deeper, more spacious, more discrimination-free spaces, and then we fall out of it because of karma. And then we know what discriminating mind is actually by contrast. That contrast gets more and more profound. We put the discriminating mind in its proper context. It's necessary to live with one to some degree. This reminds me of the well-known Rumi poem about out beyond right and wrong, there is a field. I'll meet you there. Something beautiful like that. So my main points there to reiterate is we have to watch, or we are invited to watch how we get into the courtroom, we take position, feel the offness of taking position in relationships. Realize that there is no exit from it. Conquering the other person through our superior view is not going to take us where we want to go. And that getting back to love and connection is not going to happen through the same means that got us into disconnection. In some ways, it's like we have to just choose to be a bigger person. We have to choose to be a loving person. Free ourselves into a bigger space. Because the courtroom is unending. I'll pause my spiel for now and see, do you have any thoughts on any of this? Reflections?
I have a question.
Hi, Nomi.
Hi. Guess I'm thinking about how sometimes it feels like you mentioned like taking accountability is sort of a different thing that is sometimes a good and necessary and healthy thing that's a little bit different than the courtroom, but sometimes it can go there, I feel, to the courtroom. How do you, I guess if I'm just wondering if you can just speak on the difference and how to distinguish and how to make sure taking accountability doesn't go to the courtroom, just sort of speaking on those two things.
Well, something I've been reflecting on is that human love is always conditional. And those conditions can be explicit or implicit. And usually they're not explicit enough, actually. In other words, we do need to own up for our actions, and we do need to be respected. Right? Something in us will close down if we feel like we're disrespected. The vulnerability, what will happen is some power part will come forward and shield our vulnerability because we won't feel safe. However, if we have some access to the space beyond right and wrong, that actually gives either us the possibility of mending a relationship, or it gives someone else the space to do repair. It's actually necessary, right? Like that space is free of grudge. That space has the courage to admit that I did something harmful. Because doing something harmful doesn't actually have to do with right and wrong. Owning up to that, I did something harmful. Yeah. So it's very nuanced. I guess I'd be interested in a particular example to help me, if you could articulate a little bit more.
I guess I'm thinking of a fight I recently had with my partner, where they did not do anything wrong. Like they didn't do anything harmful, but I interpreted their action as harmful, and I had a very strong reaction that was putting a lot of blame on them. And so I think I'm just thinking about like taking accountability for my blaming them, which was sort of had them shut down. Yeah.
That's one side of it. The other is communicating the vulnerability that was touched, right? And bringing to their consciousness the fact of its presence. Because if the action was unintentional, part of what happens when it's unintentional is someone is not aware of the vulnerability that's there. So it's the disclosing. So much is about communication. Yeah. People can't know how to do this dance if they don't know what we're experiencing. But that space, and there's different ways to enter this space, but that space is the space that allows a fresh start and gives people another chance. Even if we can step out of the courtroom temporarily, it allows for forgiveness to come in and understanding. Yeah. It's helped me to be able to apologize more. The space outside of right and wrong. Because actually apology and atonement and acknowledging actions is not being wrong. It's such, you bring in such an important example, and just more things pop to mind, like the fact that it's not possible not to hurt each other in a real relationship. And so and for the beauty of that is that it demands, or it coaxes out of us forgiveness and letting go, and kind of compassion for the imperfection of humans. Because we're always in this dance of power and vulnerability. However it's switching, we're on one side or the other. I have a question here from Melanie. How do we leave the courtroom if we don't feel like we are being understood? What does being the bigger person mean? So it's a great question. On one level, as I was saying, love is conditional. And on one level, if a person refuses to let go of their view and acknowledge and include ours, that might be a clue that this is not a relationship that is workable. In other words, they're staying in power. When we feel misunderstood, generally we're in the vulnerable position and they're in the power position. Like, no, I don't get why you're upset about that, or some version of that. So in some instances, leaving the courtroom means leaving the relationship. In some instances. Yeah. Hopefully that's not frequently our experience, but it can be. Then a deeper level or alternative level is the willingness to be misunderstood. That is a big part of spiritual practice. In the Buddhist teaching, he defined liberation in one framework as freedom with the 8 worldly winds. And one pair of those is being known positively and being known negatively. To be a mature practitioner is acknowledging that no matter what we do, somebody will think we suck, or think we made a mistake, or we're not doing it right, or whatever. It's impossible for somebody to not be viewed negatively by somebody at some time. And so I'm not saying this is easy, though I can say it's deep work. At some point, it may be the thing is to work on renouncing the need to be understood. Now, I don't know the particular situation, and you may not be appropriate to bring it in. There are some situations you would not do that. You need to be understood to be safe in a relationship. But there are situations where we actually need to give that up. Because, again, where does the truth lie? Where does the truth lie? If we're being misunderstood, that often means that somebody else thinks they're right about something and we think they're wrong about it. Right? You're not seeing my point of view. They're saying, I am seeing your point of view and I think your point of view is wrong. Or some iteration of that. So this is the nuance. I'm saying maybe we have to leave the relationship to get out of the courtroom sometimes if we feel like there's no willingness on someone else's end to let go of power and actually come into empathy. And sometimes what's asked is to let go of being right, being understood altogether. And that's, I don't think there's a method for that. A method could be just returning to the most raw experience of ourselves, just direct awareness. Before the whole world of views is, spread over our life and others. In other words, everybody has the ability to exit the courtroom in even one moment of real, truly being present. The courtroom depends on the past and the future. So what does being the bigger person mean? It would depend on the situation. The way I think of it is, I live with my partner, and there's all kinds of these little things that come up where I could take a position about being right. And it's so easy just to dig my heels in it. I'm right, you're wrong. No. And the bigger person is not so much, oh, I'm bigger than her. because that would be actually just another version of the courtroom. It means being a bigger person than some other part of myself. And it means feeling the suffering of holding on to being right, or needing something I can't get, feeling the suffering of that. And that suffering is the clue that it should be let go of. This is an interesting thing about Dharma, that the texture of suffering is itself the data that we have departed from truth. Grasping is based on confusion. In other words, I've given up the open space of love for the partiality of a view or a stance in any one moment. And the texture of that doesn't feel good. And so we learn to drop it. So sometimes it means, okay, honey, that's fine. Right? Sometimes it means other things. Sometimes it means, as I said, exiting a relationship where there's not any reciprocity. Being the bigger heart. Choosing to come from the more loving place in myself. Here's the thing I wanted to bring up, and this is its whole own topic. Dharma does not have a concept of authenticity. Now, this is really interesting because I think generationally, some of the younger generations, authenticity in relationship is a big deal. But this is problematic as a Dharma concept. It's not like there's an authentic way to feel about something, or there's an authentic part of you. But we could say that the most skillful thing in life, or the most reliably beneficial thing, is an open, non-grasping heart. Authenticity is still in the courtroom, because if there's authentic, there's inauthentic. With the open, non-grasping heart, in some sense, it's authentic because it doesn't suffer. Well, that's me riffing on your question without really knowing many details at all. I hope that some of that was relevant. Thank you for that question, Melanie. One of the, this always happens. I think I'm done and then something else pops up. One of the things that happens for me is a friend won't contact me for a while. And I'll start to slide into, well, I'm going to wait for them to contact me first. You have to demonstrate you're interested, right? Now, there's a time for saying, is there actual reciprocity? Like, does this person actually care about me? But sometimes I'm projecting some kind of disinterest or disconnection on the person without even communication. And so for me, an example of being the bigger person is I just reach out. I don't care if I reached out the last 3 times. I just reached out. Maybe they're busy. Maybe they're going through a particular kind of time in their life. Right? That's a simple way of going to the courtroom, is just making assumptions about people without actually knowing. And for me, I just want to choose love. I used to have, when I was at the monastery, I made a little sign for myself, put it by my door. It was like a 1-line poem. It said, all the times you didn't choose love. That was a teaching for myself. All the times you didn't choose love. So we could see that to actually being a practitioner is something radical. It's not an ordinary transactional me first way of being in the world or in relationship. It's really not. It's contrary to some ideas and demands that are now culturally sanctioned to make on people. It is in no way an invitation to let people walk over us. Not at all. If that's what it sounds like, we're misunderstanding it. Well, that's probably enough. What do you think, DG team?
Yeah, that was that was wonderful, Jogen. Do we have any other questions or comments? I have one quick one for you, Jogen, if you don't mind. So you said this could be kind of taking you to the courtroom, but I'm gonna go for it anyways. You've said twice now that love is conditional and
Human love.
human love. Okay, so then there is a love that can exist in a relationship that's unconditional and kind of boundless. Is that
Yes.
okay? Okay, I noticed some like sadness or resistance to like the idea that love can't be unconditional. So,
Yeah.
okay.
And as part of that exercise of resting attention in space and then bringing in the heart, bringing it out, bringing back in discriminating mind, is to see that our ordinary mind can't do unconditional love. It can only do conditional love. As soon as like what we want from the other person is disrupted, or we feel like we're not getting what we need, it will retract. But there is another capacity in us that can open despite outside of that whole. In a way, it's game. It's a bargain. It's an agreement at best, and at best, it's a mutual and lovely agreement. But there is something else. That's the good news. Can a human being live entirely from that? That's an interesting question.
All right. Well, that's a lovely cliffhanger to end on. Jogen, thank you so much. Thank you for being here and bringing your wisdom and laughs and all the discernment. And thank you, everyone. We'll be back next week for our final session, the closing session that will just be with the Dharma Gates team to explore what it means to build a beautiful life. So,
Ben, I have one more thing. For those who are interested in this theme, with my previous partner of 7 years, who we're now really close friends, we're going to co-lead a online class series on relationship. So this topic and more unfolded. And you stay tuned. You could go to my mailing list that I'll put my website in. If you join my mailing list, you'll hear about this class. It's coming up in October. So
awesome.
Okay.
We'll send that out on our Slack as well. So thanks for sharing that.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jogen.
Welcome.
Thank you.